At that moment, more than 50 years ago, no one knew that the sergeant who pulled the trigger was about to bear a weight that would follow him until his last breath. On October 9th, 1967, in a small school in La Higuera, Bolivia, Mario Terán Salazar received an order that would change his life forever. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel to help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers and motivate us to offer you even more historical content. Mario Terán was born on April 9, 1942 in Cochabamba, Bolivia. He was a non-commissioned officer in the army, an ordinary soldier within the military structure. When he was sent to La Higuera to capture the guerrillas, he never imagined his name would be inscribed in history. Che Guevara was captured on October 8, 1967. Wounded in the thigh, he was taken to the school in La Higuera and placed in a small room. That morning of October 9th, Mario Terán received an order that came from the presidency of Bolivia, under the supervision of agents from the American CIA. The order was simple and brutal: execute the guerrilla fighter. According to later accounts that are not entirely documented and circulate about the event, Terán later described the moment in ways that vary depending on the source. When he entered that room, Terán's hands were shaking. His body was in shock. Che realized Terán's intentions. He said something to the sergeant he would never forget. "Calm yourself and aim well. You're about to kill a man." It was not a plea, it was not a cry of terror. It was a calm order, almost compassionate, a man facing his death with dignity. Terán recounted, "I thought that with a quick movement Che could take my weapon from me. So I took a step back toward the doorway, closed my eyes, and fired. First a burst, then another. Che Guevara fell to the ground. It was 1:10 in the afternoon on October 9th, 1967. What happened next defines this entire story. Terán left that school transformed into the man who had executed the most wanted revolutionary in the Americas. The newspapers celebrated him. The president congratulated him. The military spoke of an act of heroism. Bolivia had its new national hero. But something was broken in Mario Terán. Very broken. The testimonies that emerged years later revealed a constant pattern. General Gary Prado later indicated that Terán lived with a low profile. In his writings, Prado suggested that Terán avoided public attention, although specific documentation about his concerns is limited. When he did speak, his words revealed the true story hidden behind the myth of the hero. The weight of having killed a man became his heaviest burden. In his final years, when contacted by journalists, Terán tended to avoid or reject these interview requests. Some reports suggest that he expressed discomfort with being publicly identified for this event, but there is no verifiable documentation of formal denials. Military documents from that era and General Prado's later writings indicated that Mario Terán was the soldier who executed the order, although Terán later denied this responsibility in his final years, generating historiographical debate. The guilt had consumed him so much that he did not even want to be remembered by his own name. The official history that everyone knew was built on a simple narrative. The enemy was eliminated, the revolution was stopped, the country was safe. But that narrative concealed an uncomfortable truth. Mario Terán was not a hero without conflict. He was a soldier who had obeyed an order and lived with the consequences. Some people believe that Terán kept a secret diary for years, recording his feelings and his guilt. Some sources mention that he lived with nightmares, that his marriage suffered. That alcohol became an outlet. These stories circulate in popular testimonies, but they are not confirmed in verifiable public documents. What we do know is that Terán aged away from public light. In Santa Cruz de la Sierra, Terán tried to live an ordinary life. He was hard-working. He had a family. He tried to be normal. But history would not allow it. Each anniversary of October 9th, his name appeared in the newspapers again. As the years passed, Terán suffered increasingly severe health problems. In his final years, he suffered from chronic pulmonary issues. In 2022, Mario Terán Salazar was hospitalized for chronic pulmonary problems. Mario Terán Salazar died in 2022 at the age of 79, according to Bolivian military records. The media recalled his name once more. The man who executed Che Guevara was gone. What did he leave behind? A story of military heroism, or the story of a man destroyed by obedience? What we know for certain is that Mario Terán lived as a ghost in his own life, celebrated publicly as a hero, destroyed privately by what he had done. He spent more than 5 decades trying to escape being the man he was on October 9th, 1967. When he died in 2022, the global story did not change, but something did shift in how historians and academics began to view that execution, not as a clean military act of heroism, but as a moment of human complexity, of orders carried out, of consequences lived. The truth is that the death of Che Guevara in La Higuera was not simply a political or historical event. It was an encounter between 2 human beings, one of whom pulled a trigger, the other who faced his death with composure. And that moment marked them both, though in completely different ways. Aleida Guevara March, the eldest daughter of Che, was born on November 17, 1960. She is a pediatrician in Cuba, a respected professional who has dedicated her life to service. For decades, Aleida lived with the legacy of her father, the man who changed the history of Latin America, the revolutionary who died in La Higuera. Unverified stories circulate on the internet about supposed encounters between descendants of both men, but these narratives lack documentary confirmation. What we can confirm is that the narrative of Che's execution has been constantly revised. Historians, journalists, and academics have tried to understand Guevara's final moments and the psychological impact on those who participated in his death. The dialogue between Che and Mario Terán has been analyzed, because there is something in that encounter between the executor and the executed that transcends politics. 2 men from completely different worlds meeting in a small school in Bolivia, one facing his death with dignity, the other trembling, carrying out an order that would mark him forever. Che Guevara's final words in that room were memorable. "Calm yourself and aim well, you are about to kill a man." It was not a heroic cry. It was a quiet phrase, almost philosophical, as if he were teaching Terán something about the responsibility of what he was about to do. As if he were telling him, "Understand the weight of this." According to some later accounts, Terán expressed similar feelings, although this specific direct quotation is not documented in verifiable sources. These feelings suggest an immediate awareness of the magnitude of what he had done. It was not satisfaction. It was not pride. It was horror. Mario Terán lived 55 years after La Higuera, more than half a century carrying that moment, more than half a century being the man who executed Che Guevara. Each day, each night, each time someone spoke his name, that is what they remembered. Some details of his life after 1967 are speculative. It is speculated that Terán suffered psychological problems, although these details are not documented publicly. What is confirmed is that Terán avoided public media attention for decades, maintaining a discreet presence in Bolivia. According to the official narrative, in denying he had been the executor, Terán was expressing a profound desire. However, historians have questioned this version of events, with debate existing about the exact details of what occurred. After 47 years, after having lived with his action for almost 5 decades, Terán could not bear to be that. His identity had completely fused with that shot. He was the sergeant who killed Che, and that was a weight too heavy to bear. General Gary Prado, who knew him personally, offered an interesting perspective after Terán's death. He said the sergeant voluntarily carried out the decision that came from the presidency. But what does voluntarily mean in a military context? How much freedom does a non-commissioned officer have to refuse an order from his commander? The story of Mario Terán confronts us with uncomfortable questions about individual responsibility versus obedience. If he followed orders, is he responsible? If the orders came from above, is he guilty? Or is he a victim of a system that used him and then abandoned him? What we know for certain is that Mario Terán lived as a ghost in his own life, celebrated publicly as a hero, destroyed privately by what he had done. He spent more than 5 decades trying to escape being the man he was on October 9, 1967. When he died in 2022, the global story did not change. But something did shift in how historians and academics began to view that execution. Not as a clean military act of heroism, but as a moment of human complexity, of orders carried out, of consequences lived. The truth is that the death of Che Guevara in La Higuera was not simply a political or historical event. It was an encounter between 2 human beings, one of whom pulled a trigger, the other who faced his death with composure. And that moment marked them both. Who was truly victimized that day? The revolutionary who died for his convictions, or the soldier who lived decades tormented? The answer is probably that both were victims, victims of a system that created the situation, victims of the Cold War, of international politics, of orders that came from above. Che died, Terán lived, but both were marked by that moment. In 2022, when Mario Terán Salazar died at the age of 79, the newspapers told the story again. The man who killed Che is dead. But the true story, the one we may never fully know, is what Mario Terán thought when he closed his eyes at night in his final years of life. Did he remember an enemy who had been eliminated? Or did he remember a man who had shown him more courage in his death? The truth is that he probably remembered both, wrestling with guilt and confusion every day. The story of Mario Terán is the story of how one moment can define a life. It is the story of the difference between following orders and living with the consequences. It is the story of 2 men who met in a small school in Bolivia and who could never escape that encounter. And now you, after learning this story, how do you see Mario Terán? As the hero who executed Che Guevara? Or as an ordinary man trapped in extraordinary circumstances, living 55 years under the weight of an act he could never fully justify? Like this video if this story made you reconsider the official narrative. Comment your opinion about responsibility and guilt. Should Terán have rejected the order? Or was it impossible to reject it in a military context? Subscribe for more stories about Che Guevara that challenge what we think we know.